In the early 20th century, the boreal forests of northern Ontario were more than just a wilderness. They were a gold mine. But the gold wasn't under the ground. It was the wood. At its peak, the Abitibi Power and Paper Company was a name that commanded respect across the globe. It was the world's largest producer of newsprint. If you read a newspaper in New York, London, or Toronto between 1920 and 1970, there was a high probability the paper in your hands came from an Abitibi mill. This company didn't just sell paper, it built entire civilizations. It carved towns out of the rock and muskeg, built massive dams to harness the power of roaring rivers, and employed tens of thousands of families for generations. But the story of Abitibi is also a cautionary tale of corporate hubris, devastating debt, and the brutal evolution of global markets. It endured a 14-year bankruptcy, the longest in Canadian history, only to rise again, merge into a global superpower, and finally collapse under the weight of its own legacy. Today, the name Abitibi is legally defunct. Its mills are either silent or rebranded. How did a company that was too big to fail lose its identity? This is the story of the Abitibi Power and Paper Company, a century of power, paper, and the price of progress. To understand the brand, you have to understand the geography. Abitibi takes its name from Lake Abitibi and the Abitibi River. In the Algonquin language, it means halfway water, the division between the Ottawa Valley and Hudson Bay. The company was a vertically integrated powerhouse. This meant they controlled every step of the process. They didn't just buy wood, they owned the timber rights to millions of acres of forest. They didn't just buy electricity, they built the hydroelectric dams that powered their machines. Abitibi's brand was synonymous with the company town. In places like Iroquois Falls, the company was the government, the landlord, and the grocery store. They built the schools, the hockey rinks, and the hospitals. To be an Abitibi man was a badge of stability. By the mid-20th century, the brand stood for Canadian industrial dominance. It was a pillar of the Toronto Stock Exchange and a symbol of Canada's transition from a resource colony to an industrial leader. The vision started with one man, Frank Harris Anson. Anson wasn't a woodsman. He was an entrepreneur with a background in the flour milling business. In 1912, while exploring the potential of the Abitibi region, he realized that the combination of endless spruce forests and high-volume waterfalls was a recipe for industrial greatness. On December 4, 1912, Anson incorporated the Abitibi Pulp and Paper Mills Limited in Iroquois Falls, Ontario. But he needed more than just a dream. He needed serious capital. He looked toward Montreal, the financial heart of Canada at the time. He secured backing from Shirley Ogilvie, the heir to a massive flour fortune. In 1914, the company was reorganized as the Abitibi Power and Paper Company Limited. This reorganization allowed them to move their headquarters to Montreal and tap into the deep pockets of international investors. Anson was a paternalistic leader. He believed that if he treated his workers well and gave them a high standard of living in the wilderness, they would never leave. He hired landscape architects to design Iroquois Falls to look like a garden city in the middle of the bush. Under Anson's leadership, the first rolls of paper came off the line in 1914. Within a decade, the company was expanding at a breakneck pace. The 1920s were the golden age for newsprint. The world was hungry for information. Newspapers in the United States were expanding their page counts, and they needed Canadian spruce to do it. Abitibi entered a phase of aggressive expansion. They weren't just building mills, they were buying them. They acquired the Spanish River Pulp and Paper Mills, the Fort William Paper Company, and several others. By 1927, Abitibi was a behemoth.
But this growth came at a cost. The company was financing these acquisitions through massive bond offerings. They were betting that the price of newsprint would stay high forever. At its peak, the company was an empire. They operated dozens of mills. They controlled the Abitibi Canyon, a massive hydroelectric project that was the largest of its kind since Niagara Falls. They had a private navy of tugboats and a fleet of trains. The company's dominance was so absolute that it influenced provincial politics. The Ontario government, led by Premier Howard Ferguson, granted Abitibi enormous timber concessions and power rights, often in sweetheart deals that are still debated by historians today. In the late 1920s, Abitibi was the largest company in Canada by assets, but the foundation was built on a mountain of debt. Then the world broke. The Great Depression hit the newsprint industry with the force of a tidal wave. As advertising revenue for newspapers dried up, the demand for paper plummeted. In 1927, newsprint sold for $70 a ton. By 1934, it was $40. Abitibi's mills, designed for massive volume, were now running at less than 30% capacity. The debt that fueled their rise now became their noose. On June 1, 1932, Abitibi did the unthinkable. It defaulted on its mortgage bond interest payments. On September 26th, the company was declared insolvent. What followed was a 14-year legal nightmare. It remains the longest receivership in Canadian history. The company was essentially a zombie. It kept operating, but it was owned by its creditors and managed by a court-appointed liquidator. Political battles raged over its carcass. Premiers in Ontario tried to break up the company. Creditors fought to keep it whole. It took a world war and a massive post-war boom in demand for paper to finally pull Abitibi out of the grave. In 1946, the company finally emerged from receivership, restructured and ready for a second life. For 20 years, Abitibi thrived again. In 1965, they changed their name to Abitibi Paper Company Limited to reflect their primary focus. In 1974, they made their biggest move yet. They bought the Price Company, a historic Quebec firm. The newly formed Abitibi-Price was the world's largest newsprint producer, but the world was changing. Environmental regulations began to cost the company millions in retrofitting. Southern U.S. mills were producing paper cheaper using fast-growing pine, and a new silent threat was emerging, the digital age. In 1981, the company was bought by the Reichman family's Olympia and York developments. This took the company away from its roots as an independent operator and made it a piece in a larger real estate and investment puzzle. When Olympia and York collapsed in the early 90s, Abitibi-Price was left adrift. In 1997, it merged with Stone Consolidated to become Abitibi Consolidated. The final blow came in 2007. Abitibi Consolidated merged with Bowater to form Abitibi-Bowater. In 2009, during the global financial crisis, Abitibi-Bowater filed for bankruptcy protection. The era of the giant newsprint company was over. When the company emerged in 2011, it rebranded as Resolute Forest Products. The name Abitibi was scrubbed from the corporate letterhead. It failed for three primary reasons: overexpansion and debt. They bought too many mills at overvalued prices during the 1920s, leaving them with no rainy day fund when the Depression hit. Inflexibility. The company was built for one thing: newsprint. When the world stopped reading physical newspapers, the company didn't have a plan B. And corporate cannibalism. The series of mergers in the 90s and 2000s were desperate attempts to survive by getting bigger, but they only resulted in a company that was too bloated to manage. Today, the legacy of Abitibi Power and Paper lives on in the landscape. The dams still hum, providing green energy to the grid. The forests they managed still grow, and the towns they built still stand, though many struggle to find a new identity in a post-industrial world. Abitibi was a titan of the 20th century. It represented the ambition of a young nation trying to conquer its own geography. But in the end, it was conquered by time, technology, and the very markets it once dominated. The mills may be silent, and the name may be gone, but the story of Abitibi is written in the very paper that recorded the history of the modern world.